The day my son's wife erased me from our family photos, I found proof she forged my name to steal my life. When I turned 66, I set out folding chairs in my backyard and strung little white lights across the maple tree like I'd done every summer when my husband was still alive. I made a fish fry the kind Mark used to beg for, as a boy, catfish, dredged in cornmeal hush puppy's golden and crisp coleslaw with too much mayo because that's how the grandkids like it. The china I used was the blue and white set my mother gave me, the one I swore I'd save for special occasions. Turning 66 and still standing felt special enough, but by the time the fireflies came out, those plates were still empty, every single one. I checked my phone more times than I care to admit. Birthday dinner, 7 p.m. It was right there in the calendar. I'd even sent reminders. But my calls went straight to voicemail. I kept telling myself there must be traffic on I-71, maybe a soccer game ran late. I lit citronella candles, shooed the mosquitoes, tried to keep the chicken warm in the oven. 8 o'clock came and went. Nothing. And then, because I'm a fool for punishment, I opened Facebook. The first thing I saw was Brianna, my daughter-in-law, standing on the deck of a rented Airbnb boat, holding a glass of cheap champagne like it was Veuve Clicquot. Mark had his arm around her, grinning like the man I raised had forgotten whose birthday it was. The caption said, "Keeping it intimate this year." There were the kids, too. Caleb, with his gap-toothed smile, little Lily in her sundress, building sandcastles on the shore. They were 2 hours away, celebrating without me. On my birthday, I just sat there in my navy sweater, the one with the pearl buttons Tom used to say made me look put together. I felt anything but. The cicadas buzzed, the cake sat untouched, and for the first time, I wondered if maybe Brianna had finally gotten what she wanted me erased. I'm glad you're here listening. Really. Because this isn't just a story about being forgotten. It's about what happened the very next morning, the knock at my door that changed everything. So stick with me until the end, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far a story like this can travel. Maybe someone out there will know what it feels like to be written out of your own family. That night, I didn't sleep. I cleaned the kitchen in silence, wrapping up food no one would eat, listening to the click of china going back into cupboards like the sound of a lock turning. I told myself it was a mistake, a scheduling mix-up. But I knew better. It wasn't the first time I'd been left out. Caleb's last birthday had moved dates. Emma's kindergarten orientation had happened too early for me. Patterns don't lie. By sunrise, the candles on the deck had burned to nubs. My yard looked like a ghost of the party I'd dreamed of. I made coffee strong enough to peel paint and sat at the table staring at the flowers I'd arranged, now drooping in their vases. That's when I heard the doorbell. Not a polite ding, but the long press of someone who wasn't sure if I'd answer. Through the glass, I saw a man. Mid-30s, maybe pushing 40, dark hair mussed from the wind, wearing a paramedic jacket like he'd just gotten off shift. His shoulders were stiff, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He wasn't selling solar panels, I could tell. His eyes had the same nervous weight I'd seen on my husband's face the night he told me about his diagnosis all those years ago. The look of a man about to speak something he couldn't take back. I almost didn't open the door. After the night I'd had, I wasn't in the mood for strangers. But something in me, maybe the same stubbornness that kept me setting that table, even when I knew no one was coming, made me twist the knob. "Mrs. Ellison." His voice was careful, almost apologetic. "Yes, my name's Aaron Miles." He glanced at the driveway like he expected Brianna's SUV to roll up at any minute. I think we need to talk about Caleb." And just like that, the hollow ache of last night snapped into something sharper. The birthday they stole from me was only the beginning. Aaron stood on my porch like a man carrying too much weight in his chest. And I knew right then whatever words were about to come out of his mouth would not be simple or kind. He asked if we could sit down. I led him to the kitchen table, the one still set with flowers from the night before, though the petals had already begun to curl inward like fists. He wouldn't take coffee. His hands were clasped so tight on the table that his knuckles turned white. Finally, he said, "Mrs. Ellison, I used to be with Brianna, long before she married your son. We were together for almost 2 years." I stared at him. I wanted to laugh it off, some mistake, some delusion. But his eyes didn't flinch. He went on, voice steady but raw, telling me how she left him without a word, just vanished, when she was about 2 months pregnant. "I thought she miscarried, or maybe didn't want me in the picture," he said, rubbing his temple. But when I saw Caleb for the first time in years, same chin, same way of scrunching his nose when he's concentrating, I couldn't shake it. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. My own grandson, the boy who used to run into my arms, being tied to this stranger? No, that couldn't be right. Aaron slid something across the table. It was an insurance explanation of benefits sheet, yellowed from time with Brianna's name on top, and his listed as emergency contact, prenatal care, dated just before she left him. My hands shook as I pushed it back. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered. "Because I think you deserve to know what she's been doing. And because your son deserves to know who his family really is." The words fell heavy between us. I kept picturing Caleb's face, his gap-toothed grin, the way he once pressed a dandelion into my hand and said, "Keep it safe, Grandma." Could he really belong to someone else? I didn't answer Aaron right away. Instead, I excused myself and went to the sink, running cold water just to have something to do with my hands. My reflection in the window looked smaller than I remembered. Shoulders, rounded eyes, dull from another sleepless night. For a moment, shame hit harder than anger. I'd hosted a party where no one came, and now a stranger was telling me I'd been living inside someone else's lie. When I returned, Aaron was studying the flower arrangement on the table. "You put a lot into last night, didn't you?" "Yes," I admitted. My voice cracked, and they didn't even bother with an excuse. He hesitated, then pulled out a folded napkin from his jacket pocket. On it, he'd sketched a crude chart of blood types. "I'm not a doctor," he said quickly, "but I'm a paramedic. We see this stuff. Brianna told me she was A negative back when we were together. I'm B positive. That makes Caleb's type possible. But Mark..." He looked up, eyes apologetic. "Your son is O positive. That combination shouldn't give you a kid with Caleb's blood type. Not naturally." I stared at the napkin like it was a death sentence. The neat little squares and letters felt more brutal than any shouting match could have been. Later that day, I tried calling Mark again. Straight to voicemail. "So, I texted, hope you all got home safe. Could we talk soon?" Hours later, the reply came. "Mom Bree booked a last-minute family reset. We'll make it up to you next week." A family reset. That's what they called abandoning me on my birthday. I wanted to scream, to drive the 2 hours to that lake house and pound on the door until someone looked me in the eye. But instead, I just sat in my quiet house, staring at the message, feeling that humiliation seep into my bones. Every year, I had been the glue Easter egg hunts, Sunday pot roast Christmas stockings, hand-stitched for the kids. And now, I was a footnote. Worse, I was being painted as forgettable. That night, sleep was impossible again. I found myself wandering into the attic, digging through boxes I hadn't opened in years. Old report cards of Mark's Father's Day cards Tom had scribbled in his crooked handwriting, family Polaroids, where we all looked sunburnt and happy. I clutched one photo to my chest. Mark, age 7, standing in a baseball uniform too big for him, grinning with 2 front teeth missing. Caleb had the same gap. It twisted something deep inside me. By morning, humiliation had hardened into suspicion. Patterns that I had brushed aside came rushing back, each one like a puzzle piece snapping into place. The Christmas flu that supposedly canceled my visit. The kindergarten drop-off I missed because Brianna told me the wrong time. Even the forgotten invitation to Caleb's school play. Each memory was like salt rubbed into an open wound. I decided to test something small. I called the school office pretending I'd lost the emergency contact forms. The secretary, kind but brisk, told me I was no longer listed. "Says here that Mrs. Cole submitted an updated form last month," she explained. My heart sank. I hadn't been just excluded from a birthday party. I had been erased on paper too. Standing there with the phone still in my hand, I felt two things at once: humiliation so sharp I could barely breathe, and a rising fury that tasted almost sweet. Maybe Aaron was right. Maybe Brianna wasn't just petty or jealous. Maybe she had been running a whole game I hadn't dared to see until now. Before he left my house that first morning, Aaron had said something that stuck. "She isolates people. That's how she works. First me, now you." At the time, I thought he was just bitter. But looking around my house, empty of family, filled only with leftovers from a celebration no one showed up to, I realized he might have been handing me the truth. I folded the insurance sheet into an old recipe book where I knew no one else would look. And for the first time in years, I whispered out loud, just to the quiet air of my kitchen, "Not anymore." The morning after I discovered I'd been erased from the school records, something inside me shifted. Humiliation had done its damage, yes, but underneath the sting was a small ember of defiance. I wasn't going to sit in this house and be written out of my own family, like I was a typo in somebody's diary. If Brianna thought she could make me disappear, she was going to learn just how stubborn an Ellison can be. I started with something simple information. The truth has a way of hiding in plain sight, and if you've lived 66 years, you know how to start turning over stones. That afternoon, I called the community clinic where Caleb had his checkups. I didn't ask for private files, I knew better. Instead, I scheduled a routine appointment with Dr. Reyes, an old acquaintance who'd been a neighbor back when Mark was in high school. He still remembered me as the lady with the fish fry parties. When I sat in his office, I framed my questions carefully. Suppose I asked, tapping my wedding band nervously against the armrest, "A child's blood type doesn't match what you'd expect from the parents?" What would that mean? Dr. Reyes gave me the kind of look doctors reserve for people trying to dance around the truth. It would mean either there's a misrecorded type, or one of the parents isn't who you think they are. His tone was gentle, but the implication cut sharp. He leaned forward. "Why do you ask, June?" I shook my head. "Just curiosity. A friend's grandchild?" I walked out clutching a pamphlet on pediatric nutrition, but what I really carried was confirmation. The napkin chart Aaron had drawn wasn't nonsense. It had teeth. That night, as rain pattered against the roof, I pulled out a corkboard from the hall closet. Used to be where Tom tacked up fishing maps and schedules. I laid it flat on the kitchen table and began pinning scraps. The birthday invitation I'd mailed months earlier. The text from Mark about the family reset. A screenshot of Brianna's cruise photos. The insurance sheet Aaron had left. Each piece looked small on its own, but together they formed something uglier than coincidence. I stayed up until past midnight, writing dates in black marker drawing lines with red string I'd dug out of my sewing kit. It looked dramatic, like something out of those detective shows, but it steadied me. For the first time in months, I felt less like a victim and more like a witness. The next day, I took another quiet step. My neighbor, Mrs. Patel, runs a little convenience store and has security cameras pointed toward the street. I asked if she still kept footage from last Friday. She raised an eyebrow, but said yes, 2 weeks' worth. We scrolled together on her backroom computer, the hum of the cooler filling the silence. And there it was, Brianna's SUV, pulling up to my mailbox hours before the birthday party. She slipped out in yoga pants, deposited, something, looked around, then sped off. When I checked the mailbox later that day, all I'd found was a glossy birthday card with glittery balloons. Inside was a gift card for a department store, at least that's what I thought. But when I tried it at the register 2 days later, the cashier scanned it and shook her head. "Balance is 0, ma'am." A fake kindness. For the Facebook optics, no doubt. I slid that empty card into a plastic sleeve and pinned it to my board. Proof that Brianna wasn't just forgetful, she was staging things. Creating props for her own story while erasing mine. I needed a plan, though. Collecting scraps would only go so far. So I did what mothers have done for generations. I invited them to dinner. The text I sent to Mark was, "Casual, honey. I've been thinking of setting up a living trust for the grandkids. Why don't you and Brianna come by next week and we'll talk it over?" I knew 2 things for sure. 1, Mark couldn't resist anything that sounded responsible and future-minded. And 2, Brianna wouldn't pass up a chance to oversee potential money talk. I rehearsed my tone in the bathroom mirror. Calm, neutral, maybe even a little weary. I wore my old navy sweater again, not because it made me feel elegant, but because it felt like armor now. I whispered lines under my breath. I just want what's best for the kids. Transparency is important in families. Don't you think I'd need to be steady, not emotional when the time came? Still, doubt nagged. What if Mark dismissed me as paranoid? What if Brianna twisted my words before they even landed? That's when Aaron called. He'd been quiet since our first meeting, maybe trying to gauge whether I'd collapse under the weight of what he'd given me. But his voice was firmer this time. "Mrs. Ellison, I don't want to push, but if you ever need backup, I'm here. I don't want Caleb to grow up in a house built on lies." Backup. It sounded almost ridiculous, like we were planning a sting operation. But the truth is, knowing I wasn't alone steadied me. For months, maybe years, I'd been gaslit into thinking I was irrelevant. And here was someone reminding me my instincts were still sharp. I thanked him and promised I'd keep him updated. After we hung up, I stood in front of my corkboard again, tracing the red lines with my finger. Each scrap represented a small betrayal. But together, they formed a roadmap. And so, with the rain still falling outside, I whispered into the empty kitchen, game on. The week before our so-called trust dinner, I began to sense the ground shifting beneath me. You know that feeling when someone has already made their move, and you're only just realizing you've been 2 steps behind. That's what it felt like. It started with a call from Mark. His voice was tight, rehearsed, almost as if he'd been coached. "Mom, Brianna's worried. She said you left the stove on twice last month, and she's nervous about the kids spending unsupervised time at your place." I froze. I hadn't left the stove on. Not once. My whole life, I'd been the kind of woman who double-checks the locks, the oven, even the iron before bed. Now, my own son was suggesting I couldn't be trusted alone with my grandchildren. "Mark," I said carefully, "you've eaten here dozens of times. Have you ever once smelled gas or seen me forget the oven?" He sighed. "I know, Mom. I told her that. But she's persistent. Maybe just humor her until things settle down." Humor her. That phrase rattled in my skull. Humor the woman who had erased me from emergency forms and staged birthday lies. The second blow came at the bank. I'd gone to deposit a small check from a church fundraiser. The teller, a young man who always wore colorful socks, frowned at his screen. "Mrs. Ellison, did you recently authorize a $5,000 cashier's check it cleared last month?" My stomach dropped. No, absolutely not. He turned the monitor toward me. There it was, plain as day, a withdrawal under my name memo line, house repairs. And the signature slanted sloppy, not mine. At the bottom, authorization initials B. Cole. The teller lowered his voice. It was processed using a power of attorney document on file. "Do you have one with a Brianna Cole?" My knees nearly gave out. "No, never." That's a forgery. They photocopied the papers for me. I took them home and laid the forged signature beside my driver's license. The difference was glaring. My loops neat and careful, hers jagged and rushed. Rage buzzed in my veins. This wasn't forgetfulness or miscommunication. This was theft, plain and simple. I made an appointment with a legal aid attorney downtown. A thin man with thick glasses and stacks of manila folders. He studied the papers and shook his head. This is sloppy. Wrong notary seal, mismatched witness. She didn't even try hard. He tapped the page. We can file a fraud report and move for an injunction to block further use of this POA. Walking out of that office, clutching the papers, I felt my humiliation start to curdle into something sharper justice. But Brianna wasn't finished. That Friday, I stopped by Caleb and Lily's school to drop off a set of library books the kids had forgotten. The secretary looked apologetic as she handed me a sheet. Mrs. Ellison, I'm sorry, but we can't release the children to you anymore. Mrs. Cole submitted updated forms. The sheet showed emergency contacts Brianna. Mark, a neighbor couple I'd never even met. My name was gone. Completely gone. I stood in that office holding the paper, my hands trembling. The secretary touched my arm gently. Sometimes families just reorganize. It doesn't mean they don't care. But it did. It meant exactly that. I drove home in a fog, the radio murmuring about weather and baseball scores I couldn't process. When I reached my driveway, I sat in the car for 10 full minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard my palms ached. First, I'd been erased from birthdays, then from photographs. Now officially from my grandchildren's safety net. Inside, I pinned the fraudulent POA and the school sheet onto my corkboard. The board was filling up fast screenshots, empty cards, forged signatures all tethered by red string like arteries pumping a story no one wanted to hear. I stared at it until my eyes burned. A voice inside whispered that maybe Brianna had already won. She had Mark's ear. She had the paperwork. She had the kids. And all I had were scraps of proof and a heart full of grief. But another voice, steadier, cut through. You've survived worse. You buried a husband. You worked 2 jobs when Mark was little. You don't fold now. I poured myself a cup of coffee, bitter and too strong, and sat at the table. For a long time, I just listened to the tick of the kitchen clock. Then I pulled out a notepad and wrote 3 words in capital letters, not anymore. Brianna thought she was isolating me. She thought she'd boxed me into a corner. What she didn't know was that a woman in a corner sometimes comes out swinging. And I was just getting started. The night of the fall community night. The elementary school gymnasium glowed with fluorescent lights and the smell of popcorn and hot cider. Parents shuffled between tables stacked with bake sale brownies and handmade crafts. Kids darted around with painted faces squealing at the bounce house in the corner. On the surface, it was all small-town cheer. But for me, it was a battleground. I had asked Mark and Brianna to meet me there, saying I wanted to make things easier by talking where the kids would already be. They agreed, maybe because Brianna couldn't resist showing how seamlessly she fit into the picture of family life. What she didn't know was that I had backup. Aaron stood quietly near the bleachers, arms crossed in his paramedic jacket, while a local attorney I'd retained brought along a notary and a slim folder. We didn't look like an army, but for me, it was enough. Mark arrived first, Caleb tugging his sleeve, Lily clutching a balloon. Brianna followed, immaculate as ever in a cream blouse and perfect hair, holding her casserole dish like a trophy. She kissed the air near my cheek. June, what a surprise. I didn't expect you to mingle. I forced a smile. Family nights are important, don't you think? We found a corner table. Kids ran off to the games. For a moment, it almost looked normal, my son across from me, his wife fussing with napkins. Then I placed a manila folder on the table. What's this? Mark asked. Evidence, I said softly. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. I need you to see something. Both of you. I opened the folder like a dealer laying down cards. First came the forged power of attorney alongside my real signature. The difference was undeniable, my careful loops against the jagged scrawl on the document. I never signed this, I said. Yet Brianna used it to withdraw $5,000 from my account. Mark's eyes widened. Bree, she didn't blink. That's ridiculous. Clearly your mother's mistaken. I slid forward the bank teller's affidavit. His colorful socks were seared in my memory, but what mattered was his note signature mismatch POA unverifiable. Mark rubbed his temple. Why would? Because I cut in this isn't about money alone, it's about erasing me. Look, next, I showed the security camera still Mrs. Patel had shared Brianna slipping something into my mailbox the afternoon of my birthday party. I held up the glossy balloon card gift card still taped inside. It looked generous online, but the balance was zero. Just for show. Brianna's lips tightened the first crack in her porcelain mask. You can't prove. Then maybe this will help, Aaron said, quietly stepping forward. He produced the old insurance EOB with Brianna's name and is listed as contact. He unfolded another page, his pre-employment physical showing his blood type. Mark frowned, shifting uncomfortably. What does that have to do with anything? Aaron hesitated, then said it plain. Because Caleb's blood type makes sense with me, not with you. The noise of the gym seemed to hush, though I knew kids were still laughing and music still blared. For us, time had narrowed to the four of us at that table. Mark, I said carefully, I wouldn't bring this to you if I wasn't certain, but you need to hear this next part. I pulled out my phone, tapped a file, and set it on the table. From the speaker came Brianna's own voice recorded accidentally by my smart speaker during her visit weeks earlier. Don't worry. I've got Mark convinced she's slipping. Cropping the grandma out of photos is easy. A few more months and she'll be out of the picture completely. Mark's face drained of color. He looked at his wife as though seeing her for the first time. You said Mom was confused? That she was forgetting things? Brianna reached for his hand, but he pulled it back. Then came the question that split the air in two. Is Caleb mine? For the first time since I'd known her, Brianna faltered. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched like a rope about to snap. Caleb's laughter rang from across the gym, innocent and bright, underscoring the cruelty of the moment. Aaron spoke softly, almost apologetically. I believe he's mine, Mark. But that doesn't mean you're not his father in every way that matters. You've raised him. You've loved him. Nothing can erase that. Mark's hands shook as he picked up the documents. He scanned the signatures, the dates, the blood type chart Aaron had drawn. Each page seemed to strip away another layer of denial. Finally, he looked at Brianna, his voice raw. Everything has been a lie. She tried one last gambit. Mark, don't let them poison you. Think about our life, our family built on lies. His voice rose, then cracked. The birthday cruise, the forged papers, cropping my mother out of photos. What else, Bree? What else have you lied about? The hum of the gym returned parents whispering, sensing something unfolding. Brianna glanced around, realizing the public stage she now stood on. Her cheeks flushed, her composure slipping. I leaned forward, my voice low but unyielding. You tried to erase me, but you forgot I know how to hold on. You thought you had the perfect story, but stories don't survive without truth. Mark pushed back his chair. We're done here. He called for the kids, his voice breaking. Caleb and Lily ran over oblivious to the storm. He scooped them close, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Brianna stood frozen, her dish of casserole still untouched on the table, her mask shattered. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight shift. I wasn't the invisible grandmother anymore. I was the one holding the light to the shadows. In the days after community night, the air around our family felt electric, like a storm had rolled through and left everything rattling on its foundations. Mark moved back into his old childhood rhythms, without even realizing it, calling me each morning on his way to work, dropping the kids at my porch before school. He didn't say much about Brianna in those early days, but the hollow look in his eyes told me enough. It didn't take long before lawyers got involved. A thick, white envelope arrived in my mailbox one afternoon, Brianna's attorney demanding we cease and desist from slanderous accusations. My own legal aid attorney chuckled when he read it. "This is a scare tactic," he said. "She's the one exposed, not you." Sure enough, within a week, we were sitting at a mediation table downtown, the hum of old radiators filling the silence between bursts of tense conversation. Mark sat beside me, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. Across the table, Brianna looked smaller than I'd ever seen, her hair pulled back too tight. Hands folded, her charm stripped away under fluorescent lights. Her lawyer did most of the talking. They offered a deal. Brianna would sign away the fraudulent power of attorney, repay the $5,000 with interest, and step back from any financial authority. In exchange, there would be no criminal charges pressed for fraud. My attorney leaned over to me. "It's clean. You get restitution, she avoids a record. This might be the best outcome." I nodded. I hadn't come here for vengeance. I'd come for survival for my family. But there was still the question of the children. Caleb. Lily. Aaron had filed a petition for paternity testing, not because he wanted to tear Caleb away, but because the truth had to be recognized legally. The test came back quickly, cold in its clarity, 99.8% match. Caleb was Aaron's biological son. The court's job was to decide what that meant. The judge, a woman with silver hair and a voice that carried authority without shouting, laid it out plainly. Mr. Cole remains Caleb's de facto parent. He has raised him, supported him, and is recognized as a father in every way that matters. Mr. Miles, as the biological parent, has rights as well. We will establish a shared framework that prioritizes Caleb's stability and best interest. Brianna flinched when the judge admonished her directly. "Your behavior demonstrates a pattern of alienation and deceit. The court orders you to attend co-parenting classes as well as a financial ethics program. Further violation may result in restricted custody." For the first time, I saw her eyes lose that glint of control. She looked not like a puppet master, but a person stripped of her strings. When it was over, we walked out into the cold November air. The courthouse steps stretched before us, leaves skittering across the concrete. Mark stopped and turned to me, his eyes glassy. "I let her narrate you to me, Mom," he said quietly. "I believed every story she told, and I let it turn me against you." I reached out and cupped his cheek the way I used to when he was a boy. "She was clever. But we're still here, you and me. We get to write the next chapter." He hugged me then in front of the courthouse, tighter than he had in years. Later that night back home, I stood before my corkboard. The scraps of lies, empty cards, forged signatures, screenshots looked less like a case file and more like the remains of a battle I had survived. I pulled them down one by one, sliding them into a box. The board would be repurposed, not for lies, but for life: the kids' school schedules, holiday dinners, new photographs with everyone who still chose to show up. As I pinned the first bright flyer for Caleb's soccer game, I felt the shift fully settle inside me. I had been erased, but I'd written myself back in. And Brianna. She was left to face her own silence, the loss of her grip, the loss of her narrative. She'd thought power came from control. But real power, I'd learned, comes from truth. The storm had passed. Not clean, not painless, but enough to see blue sky breaking through. 6 months later, the house that once echoed with silence now hummed with life again. On Sunday afternoons, You could hear laughter spilling out into the yard, the clatter of dishes in the sink, the squeals of children racing each other down the hallway. We had started a new tradition: Sunday dinners. Not elaborate, just consistent. Mark brought the main dish, Aaron brought dessert, and I did what I'd always done. I made sure the table was set, the lights were strung, and there was room for everyone who wanted to belong. That first Sunday fish fry do-over had been almost surreal. I stood at the grill, the same spatula I'd used on my ruined birthday, and flipped catfish fillets while Caleb ran in circles shouting, "Grandma, don't burn it this time." Lily toddled behind him, clutching a mason jar of daisies, insisting they belonged in the center of the table. Mark and Aaron worked side by side, stringing fairy lights higher than I ever could reach. Watching them, I realized family wasn't broken, it had just rearranged itself into a shape more honest. The corkboard in my kitchen, once a crime scene of red strings and scraps, had been transformed into something brighter. Now it held school flyers, soccer schedules, Lily's scribbled drawings, even a grocery list, with Caleb's careful block letters spelling ice cream. The lies had been packed away in a box in the closet, replaced with new evidence, this time of joy, of continuity. Sometimes late at night, I still felt the echo of those months when Brianna had made me believe I was fading irrelevant. But then Caleb would crawl into my lap during a movie, or Lily would whisper, "Grandma, will you braid my hair like you used to?" And those doubts dissolved like morning fog. As for Brianna, she drifted out of our lives like smoke. No phone calls, no cards, no unexpected visits. The kids asked at first, confused and sad. We answered gently, never cruelly. Mommy Brianna made choices that weren't safe, we'd say, but you are loved, and that love isn't going anywhere. Over time, their questions quieted. They adapted as children do to the family that was present instead of the one that vanished. Mark, for his part, has grown softer and stronger all at once. The guilt he carried, believing Brianna's stories, doubting me, still flickers in his eyes sometimes. But we don't live there. We live here now, in the laughter, in the work of rebuilding. And Aaron, he's found a place not as a replacement, but as an addition. Caleb calls him Dad Aaron, and Mark Dad, with no confusion, just abundance. The mantle in my living room holds a new photo, the five of us crammed together in front of the zoo's elephant enclosure. Caleb perched on Aaron's shoulders, Lily clinging to my hand, Mark in the middle with an arm around each of us. When I look at that picture, I don't see the fractures anymore. I see the miracle of survival, the way truth stitched us back together. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: family isn't about who tries to control the story. It's about who shows up when the lights aren't flattering, when the food isn't fancy, when you're not easy to love. Family is the ones who keep pulling up chairs, who keep passing the plates, who don't let you disappear. And now, I want to ask you something, because I know I can't be the only one who's been written out, who's felt invisible in their own life. If someone tried to erase you, what would you do? Have you ever had to fight your way back into your own story? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story travels. Because for me, after everything, the lesson is simple. You don't need permission to exist. You just need the courage to keep showing up, to keep loving, even when others try to dim your light. And tonight, as fireflies dance over my backyard and the kids clamor for one more scoop of ice cream, I know this truth in my bones: I was never gone. I was always here. And now, I am home. At its heart, this story is about something many of us eventually face: the fear of becoming invisible to the people we've given our lives to. June's journey reminds us that being erased doesn't mean we stop existing, and betrayal, no matter how calculated, cannot undo the truth of who we are or the love we've poured into our families. The lesson is clear: self-worth is not determined by how others treat us, but by our courage to stand up, to hold on to our dignity, and to claim our rightful place. For those of us growing older, this story is also a gentle reminder that we are not powerless. Even in the face of manipulation or being pushed aside, we can still demand honesty, protect what matters, and write ourselves back into the chapters of our own lives. If you've ever felt overlooked or quietly pushed to the margins, I hope June's resilience gives you strength. Maybe it's time to reach out to someone to speak up, or simply to refuse to let your story end in silence. And if this story spoke to you, share your own reflections in the comments below. I would love to hear how far this message travels and how it connects with your own journey. Until then, may your days be filled with peace, your evenings with laughter, and may you always feel seen, valued, and loved.